Two boys have tragically been found dead, and their mother claims it was all an accident. Last Wednesday morning, a neighbor of the family in Shepherdsville heard 4 gunshots in about 30 seconds. He came over to see what was going on and found Tiffany collapsed in their front yard, screaming for help. As we know, when police got to the scene around 11, they found her 6 and 9-year-olds in bed, barely alive and suffering from gunshot wounds to the head. They were rushed to the hospital, but tragically, they each died in surgery later that day. Right now, the 32-year-old is being held on a $2 million bond and is indicating that this was an accident with a gun left in the bedroom. However, that neighbor says he heard her tell police that she was in such a bad spot and, quote, would never do anything like this unless someone manipulated her. With that, Tiffany's friends have said that she treated her kids like kings, but that outside of being a mother had a much darker side. Reportedly one where she gets mad really fast and it's like she flips like a switch. So right now, a motive does remain unclear, but we also know Tiffany's family has called CPS repeatedly about her parenting. Authorities say she has served time in prison for drug possession, but that there's nothing in her criminal history that suggests she'd be prone to violence. And they will really only say, quote, whether you think it's mental illness, just pure evil, a combination of both, it could be substance abuse. Pick your poison, none of it is good, the result is horrific.
Boys! Peanut!
What?
That's for me?
Yeah.
What else for me? This is for me too? Ooh.
Open it.
Okay. Okay, they got the chopsticks. Okay.
13-year-old Madeline Soto is missing, and everyone should know about her case. Madeline is a middle school student from Orange County, Florida, and she was last seen with her mom's boyfriend on Monday morning. He said he dropped her off at a church across the street from the school, but when her mom came to pick her up at 4:30, they told her she'd been absent all day. Now, as we know, Madeline's mom immediately reported her missing, and then on Wednesday, her boyfriend Steven was arrested on some awful charges. According to police, he voluntarily handed over his phone, telling them that he'd accidentally performed a factory reset the day before. Police then, quote, found criminal and disturbing images he attempted to delete that appeared to show abuse that occurred in the family's home. He is being held on possession of this and is now considered the prime suspect, with police just revealing that they are confident Madeline is no longer alive. As of today, we know that police have video evidence from 7:30 Monday morning that shows Steven throwing Madeline's backpack into a dumpster behind their apartment. Investigators believe that he'd already killed her in their home at this point, and then instead of taking her to school, he moved her body. They've also said they have footage of Madeline in the vehicle with him, where they believe she is deceased. Now, aside from that, police have also just released footage of a sighting of his car from later that afternoon. He was reportedly seen in the area of State Road 19 around 1:30, and I assume police are going to use this to try and find Madeline's body. Again, today Steven is being held on possession charges, and while he was supposed to face a judge yesterday, he said he didn't want to and refused to attend. All I can really find on him is that he's been in Madeline's life for years, he doesn't have a criminal history, and he does real estate. And as for Madeline's mom, police say she is not a suspect and didn't know Madeline was missing until Monday afternoon. She initially said Madeline forgot her phone at home that day, and that maybe she asked Steven to drop her off across the street because she was embarrassed of his car. She was reportedly informed of her daughter's presumed death late last night. Today, Madeline is still missing, and she was last seen in a green sweatshirt, black shorts, and white Crocs. Anyone with information on this case is asked to contact the Orange County Sheriff's Department at the number above. Everyone should know about what's happened to 22-year-old Laken Riley. Laken was a junior nursing student, and on Thursday morning, she alone went for a run near UGA's intramural fields. She never returned home, and her roommate called police concerned at 12:07 p.m. As we know, within 30 minutes of that call, police tragically found Laken's body in a wooded area near the pedestrian loop. This video shows you just how close she was to the trail, with paramedics saying she, quote, was unconscious and not breathing and had received visible injuries. Paramedics reportedly tried to give her CPR, but it was too late, and an autopsy has ruled her death a homicide by blunt force trauma to the head. Now, on Friday, all classes at UGA were canceled, and investigators focused in on an apartment that backs up to the trails where Laken was found. And they've said it was a multitude of evidence that led them there, and they went on to place 26-year-old Jose Ibarra under arrest. Again, as we know, Jose didn't know Laken, and police believe he, quote, woke up that day with bad intentions. He, his brother, his wife, and her child all actually illegally crossed the border in September of 2022, where they were met by border security and processed for immediate removal. They then, quote, claimed reasonable fear of returning to Venezuela and were released into the U.S. on parole due to lack of detention space. Now, from here, we know Jose and his family made their way up to New York, but the couple actually split this past November after he was arrested for endangering the welfare of their 5-year-old. This time, the NYPD reportedly released him before a detainer could be issued, and he moved down to Georgia to live in that apartment with his brother. He was arrested several more times there over the past few months, and his brother was caught a few weeks ago presenting a fake green card to UGA. He was trying to provide identification to work at the dining hall, but was reportedly fired before he ever got paid. Today, Jose is being held on murder charges, and his brother is being held on fraud charges. Jose's wife says that she only married him to help build their asylum cases, but that she doesn't think he's capable of physical violence. She thinks that there could be a misunderstanding, but that if he did do this to Lakin and her family, he should face the consequences. Now, obviously, what happened to Lakin is terrifying, and it's something that young women everywhere should be aware of. If you would like to support her family during this time, the link will be in my bio. We now know more about what happened to Chase Hunter and Clayton Dorman. If you know the case, you know Chad is facing the death penalty for the murder of his 3 sons. Officials have just released new details, and somehow this has all gotten even worse. On June 15th, they say Chad came home from work early, and he started walking around their house with a Bible. He reportedly just started mumbling that Chad knows what's right, and then he went and got a rifle from their gun safe. This reportedly freaked his wife out to the point that she told him he was scaring her, and that if he didn't stop acting like this, she would call his parents. Now with that, Chad told Laura that he was just joking around, and he went to lie down in the master bedroom. But Laura, quote, didn't want him to be alone, and so she and one of the children went to be with him. They reportedly laid there with him until he pulled out the gun and shot at the child's head. Now, as we know, Laura then immediately called 911, and the operator could actually hear her screaming for the other kids to run. And that's exactly what they all did, but Chad eventually caught up to their second son. He fell to the ground after being shot at from a distance, and according to court documents, his mother saw everything. She actually told police that Chad looked back at her before shooting him again at close range. Now at this point, with 2 of the boys deceased, Chad's 16-year-old stepdaughter picked up her surviving brother and attempted to flee with him. They made it as far as the side of the road, but of course, Chad was running after them. He demanded that she put her brother down and tried to shoot him, but then the gun actually jammed. With that, the girl went running down the street for help, and the boy went running to his mom. Chad obviously followed him, and he basically wrestled him out of his wife's arms. She was even shot in the hand in the process of trying to protect him. Now, after killing his 3rd son, we know that Chad, quote, picked him up and laid him next to his 2 brothers. He then sat in the porch just waiting for police as his wife attempted to give CPR. He also reportedly confessed to everything, but an officer didn't read him his Miranda rights. As of last month, Chad's confession has been thrown out, while police maintain that he's already admitted to planning this. And an exact motive has never been said, but now I'm thinking about how he would look back at his wife before firing the fatal shots. Aside from that, we really just know that he was reportedly always yelling at his family, and that he was like a bomb waiting to explode. Today, Chad pleads not guilty to the murder of his sons by reason of insanity. He's again fighting the death penalty, so while his trial was supposed to be in July, it has since been postponed. There is a lot of new information with what happened to Lyric Woods and Devin Clark. If you've been following, you know that on September 17th, Lyric and Devin's families woke up to find that they were missing. By Monday, their bodies were found hidden behind a bush in Orange County, and officials say that their killer repeatedly shot them as they tried to run away. Now, per new court documents, we know that around 1 a.m. that night, Lyric texted Devin and asked him to pick her up from her family's home. He was a senior from a nearby high school while she was a freshman, but the 2 of them were known to be good friends. Now, for some reason, Devin couldn't drive to get Lyric that night, so he asked this guy, Isaiah Ross, to drive instead. He actually didn't know Lyric and had recently dropped out of Devin's high school, but he agreed to go pick her up from the woods behind her house. Within just an hour of that, things clearly went horribly wrong. By 3 a.m. Saturday morning, a local resident reported what he described as nearly a dozen gunshots. And then again by Monday, a group of men on 4-wheelers found the bodies of the 2 missing teens. Tragically updated autopsies report that Devin suffered 6 gunshots, with 3 to his back, 1 to his foot, 1 to the bottom of his heel, and 1 to the back of his head. As for Lyric, she was tragically hit 7 times, with 2 to her back, 2 to her arm, 1 to her hand, and 2 to her neck at close range. And just from the groupings of these shots, it was reportedly clear to police that these kids were trying to run and that they were making distance as they were shot down. Now with this, police obtained surveillance footage from the area, which quickly led them to an SUV belonging to Isaiah's mother. The teenager tried to hide out in Delaware and started releasing SoundCloud songs about murder, but after 18 days, he was arrested. His lawyer then actually missed the deadline for him to be tried as a juvenile, so police released his name and his version of events. According to Isaiah, the 3 of them were all in the car together when at some point there was a struggle for Devin's gun. This gun actually belonged to Devin's father, and we don't know why he brought it, but regardless, Isaiah says that it accidentally went off. And of course, for this to make sense, that gun would have had to go off 13 times and then chase these kids down the road. Police also have acknowledged that there was blood found inside the vehicle, but they say it wasn't enough to suggest that someone was killed inside. And they actually say that this was a cold-blooded execution and that the bodies were dragged to where they were eventually found. As of today, Isaiah Ross remains in custody, and he's really just moving from court date to court date. And on December 31st, Lyric and Devin's law finally went into action. Basically, even though Isaiah was a danger to others during his time on the run, his name legally couldn't be released. That won't be a problem anymore, and now a judge can, quote, find good cause to release the identity of a young offender. Leo and Roxy's father could not go to prison because he doesn't realize that he killed them. If you know the case, you know Matthew killed his 2-year-old and his 10-month-old because he believed his wife gave them serpent DNA. He's actually already admitted to repeatedly shooting them with a spearfishing gun, but today he, quote, still does not comprehend that they are dead. Now, according to officials, on August 7th, the Colemans were all out on their driveway, packing for a family camping trip. Without saying anything, Matthew reportedly grabbed their kids, put them in their van, and drove off. Now, with that, his wife Abby immediately called 911, knowing that he didn't have a car seat for their baby. But she initially told the responding officer that she didn't think her husband would do anything and that they would all eventually return. You can see the officer still tried to call her back and offered to come see her in person, but she declined any further assistance. Now, come the next day on August 8th, Abby seemingly changed her mind and became really worried for her family. She called police back that night to report them all missing, and so officers were sent to their house right away. They then asked to see her laptop, and right there on the Find My iPhone app, it showed that Matthew had taken the kids into Mexico. Now, as we know, police wouldn't take any action that night, with the belief still being that there wasn't any imminent danger. They contacted Border Police the next day to be on the lookout, but by that point, they were actually too late. As confirmed by surveillance footage, at 2:54 a.m., Matthew was seen leaving a Rosarito hotel with his kids and his packed bags. And then at 3:12 a.m., he texted Abby that he was finally getting some clarity. Tragically, investigators believe that it was at this point when he drove the kids to a remote ranch and shot them with a spearfishing gun. He then hid their bodies in some brush and disposed of the bloody clothing, but of course back at home, no one knew. When Abby woke up that morning, she got Matthew's message about clarity, and at 9:30 a.m., she responded with this, quote, "We are doing this together, babe. Everything you believed and know to be true is happening right now. I'm partnering with you from Santa Barbara. Let's take back our city." It's incredibly bizarre, but regardless, it was also around this time when police saw that Matthew's phone was headed back to the US border. They went to meet him there around 1 p.m., and to everyone's horror, he was alone. Again, as we know, Matthew was arrested right there, as local police would reveal that they'd found the bodies of the 2 children. The father was interviewed that same day, and to say the least, he had quite the story. According to Matthew, he and Abby began researching conspiracy theories together, and were even texting each other satanic memes. But for him, it reportedly grew much stronger, to the point where it infiltrated his entire life. Again, he reportedly genuinely believed that they had the DNA of serpents, and that they would turn into monsters. This past October, Matthew was ruled incompetent to stand trial, because he again doesn't understand that his kids are dead. That being said, he's also written several letters where he's being held, where he begs for forgiveness for what he's done. He's even written, quote, "I know that reptile DNA thing was a delusion in my own mind. I made myself believe something that wasn't there." As of today, Matthew will remain under treatment in an effort to restore his mental health. And as for Abby Coleman, police say they will continue to treat her as a victim and work to get justice for her kids.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
We now know more about the terrifying murder of 20-year-old Molly Tibbetts. If you know the case, you know that when Molly disappeared, no one could figure out what happened. It was mid-July, so she was actually back home in rural Iowa for the summer and had been house-sitting for her longtime boyfriend. As we know, Molly had plans to go on a run that day, but with it being 86 degrees, she decided to wait until the sun went down. She sent her boyfriend one last Snapchat in her running gear around 7:30, and it was then that she headed out into the cornfields. Now, as the night went on, Molly's boyfriend repeatedly tried to get in touch with her, but he couldn't get a response. He assumed she was just tired and had gone to bed early, but then the next day, her manager called. It was revealed that Molly was a no-show for work at summer camp, and this was something she would never do. Within hours, family, police, and the entire community were out searching, but they couldn't find a trace as to what could have happened. The FBI was brought in, and they looked at her boyfriend, but he really had been over 100 miles away. Unbelievably, there wouldn't be a lead in the case until mid-August, when a local resident checked his surveillance footage from the day Molly disappeared. When police looked at this footage, they found that at 7:45 p.m., it appeared to be her just briefly running through the corner of the frame. There was a black Chevy Malibu that passed by about 20 seconds later, but while this wasn't strange at first, it then doubled back and drove by the camera again. It appeared to be headed directly for Molly. While police weren't able to obtain a license plate for this car, in a small town, it didn't take long to find it. The next day, on August 16th, an on-duty officer spotted the car on a local road, and he actually followed it until the driver voluntarily pulled over. The man reportedly identified himself as John Gain, but when asked about Molly, he said he had no involvement. The officer, of course, had no evidence against him and had to let him go. From here, police made a trip to the town's dairy farm where John worked, and they found that he had switched vehicles and was now driving his girlfriend's car. He reportedly had zero obligations to coming into the station for questions about this, and after 11 hours of interrogation, he confessed. As John would reveal, his name was actually Christian Rivera, and he had illegally been living in the US for between 4 and 7 years. He ultimately admitted he saw Molly running that evening, and quote, thinking she was hot, he decided to approach her. That when she ignored him, he started running next to her, but then she pulled out her phone and threatened to call the cops. At this point, Christian says he blacked out, and he has no idea what happened to Molly next. As we know, at least some of Christian's memories came back, because that same day he took investigators to her body. She had tragically died of sharp force injuries and suffered around 12 stab wounds to the head, neck, and chest. It was also presumed she was assaulted based on missing clothing, but being in the summer heat for weeks, it was too late to tell. At Christian's trial in 2021, he testified that 2 masked men broke into his house that night and forced him to do all of this by threatening his daughter. Thankfully, prosecutors had Molly's DNA in his car, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He does repeatedly file appeals and claims his confession was forced, but as of October, the court has ruled to uphold his conviction. And as for Molly, her dad has said, quote, she was my hero and she continues to inspire people by the example of how she lived her life. If you would like to support her memorial fund, the link will be in my bio. This 13-year-old girl survived an abduction that was nothing short of a nightmare. In 8th grade, Jamie always walked to her bus stop, and October 15th was no different. She couldn't have known that she'd caught the eye of this 21-year-old on his way to work, or that he decided right there that she would be the one he would take. Over the next few days, Jake would watch Jamie and her parents, but to him, it was never the right time. The lights were always on, or there were other people at their house, up until that Monday night. Around 1 a.m., Jake would drive back over to the Clauses with 2 pairs of gloves, his head shaved, and the safety latch removed from his trunk. Meanwhile, Jamie was up late that night when she saw a car with no headlights pull into their driveway. She immediately woke up her dad, and then she saw him for the last time go downstairs to see who it was. Now, the next thing Jamie knew, there was screaming and a single gunshot. She and her mom actually booked it downstairs, and they barricaded themselves in the bathroom. They were huddled together in the tub and on the phone with the 911 operator as Jake worked to break down the door. Now, as we know, that door did eventually break, and Jake came in and ripped down the shower curtain. He then reportedly tied Jamie up, pulled her next to him, and horribly shot her mom in the head. From here, Jamie was dragged through her front yard and put in the trunk of Jake's car. They actually drove by all of the police responding to their 911 call, and as you can see, Jake even yielded for them to pass. The pair obviously wasn't stopped, and when police got to the house, they walked into the confusing scene. And that same night, officials would determine that they had a double homicide and a missing girl. But there was quite literally no indication of who did this, or what had happened to Jamie. The killer had somehow left behind 0 DNA, and police couldn't find any prints or tire tracks whatsoever. Now, with no leads, online sleuths began questioning Jamie, but police always knew that she wasn't responsible. They also reportedly did everything they could in the following months, but they had no idea that she was here. 88 days later, on January 10th, a woman walking her dog some 70 miles away saw a teenager in the middle of the road. She wasn't dressed for the snow, and before this woman could say anything to her, she said, quote, help me, I am Jamie Kloss. Now, of course, this woman knew Jamie from the news and quickly gathered that she had come running from this house next door. They ended up running together to a neighbor's further down the street, and there they all waited for Jamie to finally be rescued. The owner of this residence even guarded Jamie and the house with a gun, just in case her abductor came looking. Now that day, as police took Jamie to the hospital, they eerily passed another car in the neighborhood. It was Jake out looking for her after noticing that she'd escaped his house while he was out. This time, police pulled him over, and he told officers, quote, I did it. With Jake in custody, Jamie went on to tell her story and those 3 months of her life. Jake spoke too, saying that he always had bad thoughts, and again, that he never even met her. He told police he actually thought he would get caught right away, and that when he didn't, he figured he and Jamie could live a life together. He also said that he kept her under his bed for hours at a time, screamed at her, and on one occasion, hit her really hard. In the end, Jake pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 life terms for the murders, plus an additional 40 years for the kidnapping. But more importantly, Jamie went on to receive the Hometown Hero Award for her incredible bravery. Her parents are remembered as wonderful people, and she lives with her maternal aunt now as a true survivor. New details are coming out with Denise Huskins and what has been called the real-life Gone Girl case. If you know the case, you know Denise became victim to an abduction that nobody believed. Her boyfriend tried to tell police that she was taken by scuba divers in the middle of the night, but with that, he was accused of her murder. We now know that around 3 a.m. on March 15th, the couple really was awoken to flashing lights and red laser dots crossing the walls. They reportedly heard people talking and at first thought it was a dream, but then the words became clear. Wake up, this is a robbery. From here, a man wearing a full-body wetsuit threatened Denise and Aaron with what appeared to be a real gun. Denise was forced to tie her boyfriend up with zip ties, and then he had blacked-out swim goggles placed over his eyes and a pair of headphones over his ears. These headphones reportedly played a message that, quote, addressed Aaron by name and warned him that this was a professional group who was there to collect financial debts. that they would drug him and abduct his ex-fiancée with cameras and perimeters set around the house to restrict him from calling police. Now the thing is, these recordings didn't name Denise. Again, they named Aaron's ex-fiancée. And at some point during this entire ordeal, the intruder reportedly asked Aaron if Denise looked like her. Aaron sighed and admitted they both had long blonde hair and that his fiancée had moved out just a few months ago. So with that, it became clear that Aaron's ex was the target that night, but regardless, the intruder took Denise instead. And as for Aaron, he had his vitals taken before being drugged. He was left tied up on the living room couch, but also with a fresh change of clothes and pair of scissors to cut himself free. When Aaron did wake up in the morning, he found that both Denise and her car were missing, and that he had 2 new emails asking for $15,000. There also really were cameras and perimeters set around the house, so being terrified, it wasn't until almost 2 p.m. when he contacted police. As we know, when authorities got to the house that afternoon, they heard Aaron's story and immediately asked if he was on drugs. And to that, Aaron told them that he was, because the intruders had drugged him. He tried to show them the evidence of what had happened, but the odds were stacked against him. His girlfriend was missing, her car was missing, and he had her cell phone. There was also an ex-fiancé in the picture, and again, an absolutely insane story. Now, over the next 2 days after the attack, letters were sent to local news outlets claiming that Denise would be returned home soon. And then, that is exactly what happened. Denise was dropped off hours away and right outside of her parents' house in Huntington Beach. With Denise's return, she confirmed everything that Aaron had said and explained that she had been held captive in a quiet house for the past 2 days. But to the police, none of this made any sense. They publicly stated that it was all a hoax and that it was the couple who owed the community an apology. From here, Denise's abductor began writing more letters to the press, both showing proof of the kidnapping and demanding that police apologize for not believing her. Still, nothing would change until 2 months later, when a man named Matthew Mueller left his phone at the scene of yet another home invasion. When police executed a search warrant at Matthew's house, they found tons of physical evidence relating to Aaron and Quinn's case. He actually immediately confessed and blamed his mental illness for everything, but to this day, we really don't know if he had accomplices or why he targeted Aaron's ex. Just that he used to be in the Marines and both studied and taught at Harvard University. He was ultimately sentenced to 40 years in prison for the crime. And as for the couple, Quinn ended up proposing, and they've since gotten married and had their 2 daughters. They've also been awarded $2.5 million and received somewhat of an apology from police. Not sponsored, but Netflix is coming out with a new series on this case on Wednesday. 2 years after Lacey Fletcher was found melted into her parents' couch, there are finally updates in her case. At 14, Lacey was a freshman at Brownsville Baptist Academy, but she actually never went back for her sophomore year. That following spring of 1999, her parents pulled her out, with the only explanation being that her autism was accelerating. As we know, over the next few years, Lacey still played with her old friends from school. She was known to act a bit younger than her age, being 17 and still loving children's movies, but she was well liked by everyone until the day she stopped coming around. Officially, we know that one of the family's neighbors last saw Lacey in 2007 when she would have been 21 years old. And like everyone, he assumed that when he didn't see her again, she'd probably gone off to college and started her own life. Come 2016, it's been 10 years since that neighbor saw Lacey, and he's having a conversation with her dad out by their front lawns. She would have been about 30 at this point, so he asked how she was doing and if she moved away, but her dad was quick to say she's still here and she's fine. He reportedly immediately changed the subject, and no further questions were asked. His wife even went on to become vice mayor, as their daughter was eaten alive by maggots on their living room couch. Again, as we know, it was January 3rd, 2022, when Sheila finally called police. She said she just woke up to find her daughter deceased, but when officials got to the scene that day, it was so much worse than that. According to the coroner, he walked through the family's perfectly cut lawn before being confronted with an odor that not even he had smelled before. The house was clean and in perfect condition, except for this couch in the middle of the living room. It seemed to just be covered in feces, but upon taking a closer look, it was clear that this was what was left of Lacey. Horribly, Lacey was not found on her parents' couch, but inside of it. She was sitting crisscrossed and buried up to her shoulders in a hole that her body had worn down over 12 years. There were maggots all over her, along with rotten flesh and holes down to the bone. As the coroner packed her into a body bag, her parents reportedly just stood in the kitchen with no explanation as to what could have happened. In the end, an autopsy would report that Lacey died of sepsis due to bone infection, immobility, malnutrition, and severe chronic neglect. She had COVID when she died, and the only thing in her stomach was feces and sofa foam. She weighed 96 pounds at 36 years old, and again, it was estimated that she was on that couch for 12 years. Now, unbelievably, Lacey's parents weren't interviewed by police until 3 weeks later on January 18th. And they said that Lacey had social anxiety and that staying on the couch was a personal choice that she made. That they never brought her to the doctor because she wasn't sick, and they even set up a fresh change of clothes and a toilet next to the couch for when she, quote, was ready to get up. The thing is, Lacey couldn't have gotten up even if she wanted to. A lot of news sources report that she had locked-in syndrome, but she could still swallow and consume food and liquid without a tube. It was actually refuted by the coroner, but I don't think we can know for sure. Today there are a lot of theories as to why Lacey didn't get up, but regardless, after that first year or so on the couch, she physically wouldn't have been able to. Sheila and Clay Fletcher were ultimately arrested in May of 2022, and the jury decided that they should be charged with second-degree murder. They initially pleaded not guilty, but then this week they formally agreed to plead no contest to a reduced charge of manslaughter. Since Lacey's death, the family attorney has unbelievably released a statement that reads, quote, "They loved their daughter to death. That is the true statement of the Fletchers." She is described by her old friends and neighbors as a sweet girl who loved Disney movies, country music, and volleyball.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
More than 50,000 hours have now been spent searching for Sierra Lamar. If you know the case, you know Sierra was taken from her bus stop in Morgan Hill, California. It was already a tough year moving there after her parents' divorce, but she actually had plans that morning to exchange makeup with a new friend before school. She last posted this selfie at 7 a.m. after getting dressed, with her mom already having left for work. As we know, Sierra would have headed out about 10 minutes later for the unmarked bus stop just for her. It was about a half-mile away, but completely surrounded by farmland, and as you can see, kind of in the middle of nowhere. Her bus came by at 7:25 that morning like it always did, but this time the street was empty. Now, come early evening, Marlene came home from work and, of course, couldn't find Sierra anywhere. The initial thought was that maybe she'd gone out with friends, but after calling around, she learned that she was absent all day. Marlene immediately reported her youngest daughter missing, as she would have done like 10 hours before. Now, from here, police finally began their investigation, but while they initially found that Sierra's phone was dead, it suddenly started turning on and off at 3:45 a.m. It's believed that water from the ground tricked the phone into thinking it was charging, and after tracking the pings to a nearby field, officers found it. It was reportedly clear it was thrown out of a moving vehicle, confirming everyone's worst fears. With thoughts of foul play, officers then began to look at offenders in the area, including 250 of them in a 5-mile radius, and Sierra's father. They had reportedly cleared him and were in the process of clearing everyone else when they got their next lead. On Sunday morning, they found more of Sierra's belongings. In a cactus on another nearby property, there was Sierra's pink and black juicy backpack that she left the house with Friday morning. Even worse, when officers opened it up, all of her personal belongings were inside. This included all of the clothing and undergarments she had been wearing that day, leading everyone to believe that at this point, they may be looking for a body. From here, officers searched 300 square miles in hopes of finding Sierra. Nothing came of it, but after 3 more weeks, DNA tests would reveal that 21-year-old Antolin Torres was a match. He was actually never prosecuted for his felony assault charge, so it was just chance he was in the system. As police would learn, Antolin lived 7 miles away in Maple Leaf RV Park with his toddler and his pregnant wife. Officers went to talk to him right away, but when asked if he had a connection to Sierra, he, quote, laughed and then said, "I doubt it." They had no choice but to let him go, but they weren't even close to done with him. They had 2 detectives pose as a couple and move into the trailer across the street in an effort to get more information. Again, as we know, these detectives found nothing from watching Antolin, but they were able to confirm that he left the trailer park 20 minutes before Sierra disappeared. They decided to keep on him and keep digging, and that is when they found 3 unsolved attempted abductions that he was connected to. All 3 women were attacked in their cars at the Safeway where Antolin worked, and after retesting evidence from those cases, it also came back as a match. With that, and over 2 months since Sierra's disappearance, Antolin was questioned again. This time he tried to say his DNA could be on Sierra's belongings because he threw out a dirty tissue right where her stuff was found. He was arrested in a matter of days. In the end, Antolin was convicted of Sierra's murder, along with the attempted abductions of those 3 other women. But to this day, he maintains his innocence and refuses to tell anyone what he did with Sierra. Something I actually can't find but want to know is what time he got back to the trailer park that day. Again, we know Sierra was abducted around 7:20, but I feel like knowing when he got back could kind of tell us how far he could have taken her. Sierra is described as a funny, bright, and playful person who always wanted to make people laugh. Anyone with information on her whereabouts is asked to contact the Morgan Hill Police Department at 408-779-2101.